When it comes to zakah, we have lost all consensus about literally everything. Your donor intent is very clear. You're not giving your zakah to pay for Google ads. You're not giving it, you're not paying zakah for entertainment. The effect of a lot of these Muslim scholars have been doing is, oftentimes they want to accommodate nonprofits, right? Because nonprofits are taking this money. It's like, oh, you're doing such wonderful work, and yeah, it's permissible, fi sabilillah, etc. But the cumulative effect of all of this is that it becomes incredibly regressive. And that, because we have access, nonprofits have access to the affluent. Do the poor have access to the affluent?
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of the Prophetic Mentality Podcast. I am your host, Amr Mabrouk, joined by my co-host, Munir. And today we have a very special guest here during Ramadan. We have Ahmed Shaikh. Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
Wa alaikum assalam. Doing great. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. For those of you that don't know, Ahmed Shaikh is a Southern California attorney. He writes about inheritance, nonprofits, and other legal issues affecting Muslims in the United States. He's the co-author of Estate Planning for the Muslim Client, published by the American Bar Association. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ahmed, this is a topic that has come up multiple times on our podcast over the past few years. And we've been itching to have this episode. So alhamdulillah, we're really happy that you are able to join us here this afternoon.
Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be at this wonderful studio at IOK. It's great. It was great to drive up here too. I mean, the super bloom is amazing. Just looking around, it's mashallah, it's beautiful here.
That is one of the great things about living in California. Right after the rainy season, everything looks gorgeous and beautiful.
Absolutely.
Alhamdulillah. And yes, we are in IOK, but we're nowhere near affiliated with IOK. So all opinions expressed in this podcast, prior and moving forward, are the opinions of solely our guest and Munir and myself. We are not funded by anybody. We take no money from anybody. This is just a pure passion project that we do here. So that's just a disclaimer because, this topic, may be a little bit touchy. So one of the things that you've been writing about quite a bit on your Ihsan newsletter is the issue of zakat when it comes to Muslim nonprofits.
Right.
Or not maybe issue, I would say the topic of zakat of Muslim nonprofits, how they go about collecting it, distributing it, and the policies behind the organizations that do this. So our first question is, why did you take this topic topic on for writing it? Like what was the main motivation?
Right. So I started writing about the things that have been going on, ongoing issues within the Muslim community, especially nonprofits, back during the days of countering violent extremism. That was around 2015, 2016, 2015 mostly. And, I looked into certain organizations, and one of them was the Muslim Public Affairs Council, which was a big pro-CVE organization, and it occurred to me that they're also accepting zakah. Part of it is, why are they taking CVE? Money. One of the things about nonprofits, and, maybe not all nonprofits, but come on, let's be real. Nonprofits like money, right? Sometimes they don't care what they're getting it for or why they're getting it and what they're doing for it. In a lot of ways, they're similar to people, because they're actually run by people. And so the zakat, the way they handled zakat looked almost cartoonish and weird and just worth pointing out. When I was, and I started to get more involved with zakat and just sort of writing about it. I was also involved with a significant Muslim nonprofit as well. So I was on the executive council of the Islamic Society of North America. And I was just really interested in the organization's activities. It's an organization that's very old, maybe waning in a little bit of relevance, known mostly as a convention, maybe as with Mina, it might be the camps. But they were accepting quite a bit of zakah. And what I understood about the zakah at the time was that, if somebody gives zakah, then we just back it out and we give it to poor and needy families. That was the understanding that we had. But then it occurred to me, after just doing just a minor bit of digging around, that we had about $500,000 at the time, I think, that could be a little bit off by the numbers, but it's about $500,000 that was not being backed out and was just being put into the general fund. And one of the things that we might do at ISNA at the time was we would pay we'd pay a first class airfare.
Is this something you previously wrote about?
No.
Because you're kind of telling us a little bit of the back end that was happening at ISNA.
And so we were paying some, we would pay first class airfare. We'd pay for the hotel for, a wealthy person, with the general funds. And that includes Zakat, right? And I didn't know this. And it didn't seem like a lot of people at the organization knew that this was going on. And when they did, they were horrified, right? I mean, as an organization, it's like, oh my gosh, this is what we're doing with Zakat, right? And I started to engage with the issue a little bit more, just as somebody who, like, it's my job. I'm a fiduciary for an organization, and one of our responsibilities is being custodians for people's literal worship, right? I mean, if you think about Zakat, right, what do you think of, like, when you give Zakat, like, what's the next word that might come to your mind? Like, what is Zakat?
I think for the layperson, it's when you think of Zakat, it's like it's going to poor, needy people. I think that's
a pillar. It's one of the 5 pillars.
Yeah. Five pillars. But do you think of charity when you give to Zakat?
Yeah, actually.
Do you think Zakat is charity? Yeah. I personally think that's the wrong way to look at it. Zakat is a tax.
Yeah, it's not a charity.
Right?
Sure.
And if you decide not to pay Zakat, you just sort of keep it in your pocket, you're basically stealing, right?
You're going to be accountable with
right.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Well, I mean, it's
which makes it different than charity. Charity I can give willingly, non-willingly to
right.
someone. Yeah.
So you want to, when you give to charity, you're going to give from wealth that is yours, that you have every right to keep.
Yes.
And you're using it for some sort of social good, and that is charity. Zakah is different because there's a discrete group of people who have rights to that thing, right? And if you don't give up the zakah, then you're basically a thief, right? Historically, it was a tax, right? And you calculate it like a tax. Yeah. So one of the things that might happen, one of my colleagues over at ISNA will notice a donation coming in, and it'd be like, I don't know, just coming out with a number in the air like $4,642.62, right? It's like, who writes a donation like that, right? Well, this is very clearly zakah, right? He forgot to mark the checkbox that it's zakah, but you can't write a donation like that unless it's zakah. This is something that, this is money that is impure for me. I cannot hold on to this money. It is not mine.
Yeah,
right?
It'd be weird to give charity like that. Just, random members of principles. Yeah, so makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so, historically, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh actually went to war in part because of people not paying zakah, right?
Yeah.
If you don't pay your taxes, what happens, right? People with guns and badges will come and barge into your door. That's
the least. Yeah, they'll freeze your accounts. They have complete control over your entire life. It's like one of the worst things that can happen to you in this country.
Absolutely, but that doesn't happen here, right? And so then we actually hand over this responsibility to nonprofits, and then we have nonprofits doing whatever it is that they want with this. And so in my mind, I think that we should, and I think a lot of Muslims really do inherently think of this. If they just sit and really think about what they're doing with zakah, they really want to take it very seriously. So I started writing about zakah with these political organizations that they might be taking it. They might be taking it because of the fi sabilillah. That's a fi sabilillah expansion, which is relatively recent vintage, which is this you can just do whatever you want with zakah as long as it's good. It's a good thing to do. Just do it, right? So if you're going to give to a political organization or an activist organization or something like that, like MPAC, if you give zakah to MPAC, there's part of me that would say, that's totally wrong, but at the same time, there really isn't a problem with donor intent, because if you are a supporter of MPAC and you're giving your zakat to MPAC, you probably never really cared about poor people, right? So if you are giving something to Islamic Relief, right? If you're giving your zakat to Islamic Relief, then your donor intent is very clear. You're not giving your zakat to pay for Google ads. You're not giving it, you're not paying zakat for entertainment, right? You're not paying, you might, maybe part of you realizes that that's what you're doing, right? Especially if you show up at a gala where there's like a comedian or a singer or like, a nicely produced video. I mean, somebody paid for that, right? But it was probably you. But that's not why you do it, right? You do it because you understand that you're giving this money to the poor, right? And if you're giving like from your own wealth, right, and you're giving to, a comedian or a singer or pay for a video or pay for a Google ad, that's okay. But zakat that's special, right? And we're taking that specialness away from it by treating it just like anything else, because it's not like anything else. It's something that's incredibly vital, and it's a pillar of Islam that we are taking a sledgehammer to systematically.
So wouldn't people's contention with you be, okay, I'm giving it to MPAC, but there's a difference of opinion on where my zakat can go? Yes, of the two of the categories are for poor people, fuqara, masakin. Someone's poor or someone has destitute, has absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
But then the ones whose hearts are inclined towards Islam. So I can give money to a politician to lobby for me, and they can help produce policies that are better for Muslims here in the country and help the hearts of all those around me stop being Islamophobes. Or I can give fi sabilillah in the path of God. And a lot of modern day scholars will say if it's educational efforts and dawah efforts, then why not?
So I'm definitely not going to be writing or talking about this from the perspective of an Islamic scholar. You're going to say, okay, my fiqh is right and your fiqh is wrong, and this is why. And I don't think that it's necessarily profitable for us to have that discussion, right?
There is actually something you said in one of your articles, and I would like to quote it to kind of summarize your attitude in regards to this. Something I think you wrote in 2021, and it really resonated with me. So I think I want to quote it for the audience. So I took some parts out, but majority of it is there. So quoting you, Zakat among Muslims in the United States has no limits at all, now relegated to the cesspit of fatwa shopping where just about anything goes. Zakat is that pillar of Islam treated by Muslim leaders with the solemnity and seriousness of a high school dress code, defined more by what nonsense one can get away with rather than the purpose of it in the first place. The practical effect of much zakat in the United States is the affluent recirculating wealth amongst themselves. This practice among American Muslims violates a principle in the Quran: wealth not merely circulate among your rich. 59.7. You will get many fatwas from Sheikh this or Doctor that telling you that zakat can mean almost anything. And then here you say, I make no claims about the integrity or quality of an individual ruling. I do, however, lament the cumulative effect of this demoralizing and socially unjust campaign to anything of zakat, which I think, like, that line right there is kind of like probably your main contention, that there should be some sort of more strict rules and guidelines and not just anything fi sabilillah and then the money just goes here and there, right?
So, in the absence of some sort of consensus within our society about what the limits are, what is or what is not acceptable, right?
Yeah.
So we know that there are certain things that are unacceptable, like I don't know, things that maybe violate criminal law or something in Islamic schools. Yeah, okay, that's not good, right? Maybe there are practices that we think, okay, well, this is just over the line, but if we are just simply relegating ourselves to, well, there's this sheikh that says I can do it, so hey, I'm doing it, right? Then we simply give away our own agency as donors, as believers, as people who are, this is our worship, right?
Yeah.
And so when I write about this stuff, and this is why where the notion of the newsletter kind of comes from, is that we do know that intuitively that praying on a carpet that's been soiled by dogs or something, right? Well, we wouldn't do that. I mean, that's not something that would ever occur to us.
Yeah.
We take care about things like tahara, right? We take care about things like we take care. There's this consensus about this stuff.
Yeah.
But when it comes to zakah, we have lost all consensus about literally everything. I think maybe I can take that a little bit too far, because I think that intuitively it's all there, right? I mean, if I were to say something about, well, zakah, the idea that it's supposed to go from it really shouldn't actually exacerbate social injustices, right?
Yeah.
That the effect of a lot of these what Muslim scholars have been doing is, oftentimes they want to accommodate nonprofits, right? Because nonprofits are taking this money. It's like, oh, you're doing such wonderful work, and yeah, it's permissible, fi sabilillah, etc. But the cumulative effect of all of this is that it becomes incredibly regressive, and that because we have access, nonprofits have access to the affluent, right?
Yeah.
Do the poor have access to the affluent? I mean, and one of the reasons why we give zakat to organizations in the first place is we probably don't know any poor people, or we don't know them well enough to know that this would be a good person to give zakat to.
You mainly hang around with people that are within your own socioeconomic
Absolutely.
class. And a lot of people are not willing to go out there and say, I actually need zakat, right? So you do rely on these organizations. You do rely on your local mosque to, on the back end, qualify people, look for people, figure out who deserves it and who doesn't, and make sure it goes to the right person, which I think if you ask any lay person, right, going back to talking about lay people, we're all in agreement about this. When we give our zakat, you're on Islamic Relief's website, you pick the campaign that you want to fund. It's going to go to an orphan in Yemen, and it's $60, and then great. And then they ask you, do you want to help us more by paying the processing fee for using your credit card? You say yes.
Sure.
Right? So, at what point, kind of lost my train of thought.
I guess your contention is, yes, you're not going to fight it from a fiqh standpoint, a Islamic law standpoint, which makes sense. Okay, so none of us here are qualified muftis or judges to do such thing. But you're saying, look, as a Muslim in America, just think logically about where do you want your money to go, or at least your intentions. Yes, someone can give it to a politician or whatever else, these impact type things, and it's totally permissible. Maybe on the Yawm al-Qiyamah, Day of Judgment, you're not going to be held accountable for such a thing. We'll accept that difference of opinion. You say, in terms of the spirit of the law, in terms of, yes, there's a difference between letter of the law and spirit of the law. So yes, letter of the law, you might be getting away with it. But spirit of the law is really what you think. Do you think God legislated it, or do you believe that when I'm paying this zakat, I have two options? It's not like there's no poor people. So I have two options. I give it to these poor people who need it, or do I give it to a system that is going to benefit me in the long run, which I think is the affluent helping the affluent, essentially.
I think that I think that you can probably take that a little bit too far as well. Just because as a Muslim on your own, right, you can make judgments about what fatwas you're going to buy or you're not, right? I mean, there's going to be scholars out there that'll tell you can drink beer, right? That's a thing. People will say that.
What scholars say this?
Well, there's one in Egypt. It's like you can just Google it. You'll find this guy. And so anyway, there's a
Muslim.
Right. Anyway, so you're going to find scholars that will tell you all sorts of things, and you will need to actually evaluate why that is, and what the other opinions are, and what you accept as being legitimate or not. And simply stating that, well, yeah, there are these people with these opinions out there. We do have to look at things like conflicts of interest. We should look at, why are they doing this? Why was it this way for hundreds of years or well over 1,000 years? And why did it change? Right. And I think that it is important to actually look at it, because all of this stuff about fi sabilillah and everything is zakah eligible. Well, yeah, of course, there are scholars who have a lot of years of education under their belt, and they are explicitly talking about, fi sabilillah expansion. Well, why are we expanding it? What is the purpose behind that? And then do we actually accept that? Because I might personally feel, and I mean, I can't tell you what to believe, but I would personally feel that giving zakat to MPAC is a waste of zakat, right? I'd probably, if somebody,
I'd agree.
right?
I agree too.
So
especially after their recent hire, they're hiring, what's his name? Javid.
Yeah, the guy, the Muhammad Rasulullah part was made up 80 years later guy.
Yeah, he
Oh,
believes
he believes taxes count as zakat, by the way.
What?
Anyway, go ahead.
So that's actually
We need to
very
get Dr.
that's
Shadi.
actually a very interesting point because there's this guy Javid Ghamdi who is he's in Texas, but he speaks in very eloquently in Urdu. So he's a very, very popular guy in Pakistan. But and people have brought this up to me in the past as well. What happened is that there's this thing called Zakat for development. There's this train of thought. Remember, who collects zakat in Muslim countries?
It's the government.
It's the government, right?
Yeah.
And so the government might change their policies from time to time, and they might get they have scholars that work for them, and there might be a period of time where you'll be like, okay, well, FUI to the poor, we want to just use zakat to build bridges or build hospitals or do development work, right, in our country. That's what we think zakat should be used for. And so there's this genre of scholars that then started coming around a few decades ago. And they started to give these opinions that zakat can basically be used for various municipal services, for development, for construction projects, things like that. Things to just kind of build up your country, and you don't really need to use it for the poor anymore because the poor are going to, of course, poor people can walk on bridges and get into going into hospitals or stuff like that. But for things for the common good, you can basically use it in the same way that you might use it for the city of Yorba Linda or somebody. They'll tax you and they'll build a pedestrian bridge, right? And everybody can use that, right? And so, I think that Javid Ghamdi, I think very correctly in a way that, if you can take, he's not correct in this in the sense that that I accept his view, but he's correct in the sense that if you take this far enough, the taxes that you pay should count as zakat because a lot of it is actually being used for the public good. It's being used for, some of it is not being used for the public good, some it's used for evil, but some of it is used for good. A lot of it, national parks, schools, bridges, trains, all these wonderful things are being paid. So why do you need to pay for zakat? And so somebody like Javid Ghamdi will be like, just count your taxes as part of your zakat. You're good, right?
In a Muslim country.
No, anywhere. Doesn't matter.
Oh, anywhere.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's all being used for the common good. So we're all good. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So, and there are a lot of Muslims who do believe that, right? That, okay, I'm paying this much in taxes. And so this might be a common question that Islamic scholars will get. Look, I'm paying like this boatload of money in taxes every year. Why do I still need to also pay zakat? Because remember, zakat is, if you think in terms of what it is, it's a tax, right?
2.5% tax.
Yeah,
on your wealth,
it's a tax, and so I'm already paying it, and I'm paying it for purposes that you calculate it. That's what it could be used for.
Yeah.
So why do it, right? So that's anybody who thinks anything can be used for zakat, right? If you can use zakat for just about anything that's good, the government's doing a lot of good stuff. So why pay MPAC at all? Your taxes are covered, right?
They're getting the CVE money from the taxes. So in a way, they got what they need, right?
I think you bring up a good point because the contention, I think, it was even one of your articles with Sheikh Uthman was, why does Allah even limit it then? Why is he saying innama? He starts the ayah innama. Only sadaqat, the zakat is only for, and then gives you a list of 8 people. It's like, why even limit it then? Why, if at the end of the day you're gonna count sabilillah, fi sabilillah for fi sabilillah anything, the path of, what doesn't count? This podcast is zakat eligible by these definitions. It's a dawah effort that goes out for Muslims, and we can use it, the money to do AdSense and et cetera, right?
Yeah.
What becomes the limit anymore? Of who Muslim isn't doing good? Let's put it that way. What Muslim is not striving to do good? You're trying to do good? Bismillah, you're zakat eligible then. What is the limit then, if anything? Because everyone opens up the meaning, but then where's the restriction? At what point do we say this is not zakat eligible? Which is, I think, is the problem with these definitions. But nobody restricts it anymore. They just opened it up.
And I think some of the examples I gave in one of my articles was, like that one Turkish. Ertugrul. Yeah, absolutely. That made a big difference in people's lives. There's going to be all these stories of people who did shahada because of, they watched a costume drama about, Turkey, several hundred years ago. that's maybe the people who are making it are doing it with that intention, that they want it to be dawah, right? They want it to, they want to actually put Islam in a good light. Why can't that?
It is like state-sponsored propaganda. Like if you want, by definition, that's what it is.
But is it
It's very-
sponsored state propaganda? Is the question.
It was very successful, So,
Right.
But what is the limit?
Right.
And I think what it comes down to is, for each layman, we all believe that it should go to the poor and needy. So this comes, we don't live in a Muslim country, so we can't just give our money to the government and say, I can't do anything else, right? I don't know any poor people.
Right.
We don't live in the time of Khilafah, where the caliph is handling this. So the onus is on the individual,
It is.
right, to kind of do their research and figure out, is this organization that I'm giving my money to, is the masjid that I'm giving my money to, are they really, do they have separate bank accounts? What is their policy? Is the back end clean? And I think for many years, most people kind of took people's, took organizations, they took their word for it, right?
Excuse me. Mm-hmm.
And then it wasn't until your article started coming around, then it was kind of like, wait a minute, there's something fishy going on, right? So, for example, I think this can tie into the next part of our question, which I guess we haven't really. I asked one question and we've kind of just been talking. What
I hope it's valuable to your listeners. I don't know.
No, it is, and this goes to the feedback that you've been receiving,
Right.
About writing about zakat. Have you seen a positive change in some of the organizations that you've been addressing? You've written about Islamic Relief, you've written about Engage, you've written about MPAC. What has been the feedback like from the public, from lay people, and from these organizations? I'm sure they may have responded to some of your points. So what has that been like?
Right. I think that in some ways there have been some discussions. A lot of people will just rather discuss it with scholars or get scholarly opinions, especially scholars that they might like. So, like an organization like CARE, for example, CARE National, they have a separate bank account for zakat.
CARE National.
CARE National, yeah. They didn't do that before. They even accepted zakat and they said that, okay, we're doing separate accounting or something like that. Now, their zakat policy might quibble with. I mean, it's very similar in a way to MPAC, right? They say that, well, all of our programs are zakat eligible. But, I might say, well, okay, you're doing a bunch of weird things with your zakat money. You might be, especially if you're going to accept zakat for everything, you're going to be putting hors d'oeuvres out for, at donor events. And, I'm a donor. I'm eating my own zakah. I mean, not tasty, and so, I mean, this is a real concern that donors should have, right? I mean, okay, this is something I want to get rid of, right? It is impure to me, right? I can't keep it, right? And if we're going to put zakah into what are essentially mutual benefit associations, right? And if we are people that, if CARE is actually outright telling you that you're benefiting from CARE, right? I mean, wouldn't CARE tell you that CARE is a valuable organization to you, right? Well, I'm giving you zakah so you can come back and benefit me, right? I mean, why can't I just pay zakat to Target now, right? And have them give them, then they'll give me something in exchange. Same thing with the masjid. I mean, masajid are, a lot of them are relatively good about it. I mean, not everybody. So if you have you have a place with $1 million homes and, they want to do a phase 3 expansion and, we're going to accept zakah for this. I think that a lot of people within the local community will probably say, no, you don't. You can't do that, right?
Yeah.
Communities have split up over this. This is common. Like where one group will say we want to use our zakat for the masjid, other one says no, you can't. So they'll literally leave making a masjid with their zakat. Like, okay, we'll just do it ourselves then, kind of thing. Yeah.
It's happened in Southern California. There was they came out, one of the local mosques was doing an expansion, and there was a rumor that they were using zakat funds, and then the imam had to go out there and say, no, we're not. We would never do that. So it's good that people on the ground give this kind of pushback, because without it, masjid boards will take whatever opinion pleases them, in a sense, or not pleases them, but pleases the situation, right?
Well, it's easier, right? What happened was that
it's guaranteed income.
I mean, it is and it isn't, because if there's resistance, if it's controversial, people won't do it. I mean, they'll try to find another way, because if there's friction within the Muslim community, and part of an article, part of what happens within the articles I write is that the activities that nonprofits engage in, they can continue doing it. I can't stop it, but there might be some friction, especially if what they're doing is questionable, right? And that does happen at the masjid level, where we intuitively know that a masjid is a mutual benefit, right, for our community, right? We're going to, if there's if there's some exciting new construction project going on in our community, a lot of people in our local community, they're going to dig deep, and they know, because, gosh, our kids grow up in this place. It's going to be like really, really cool to have a facility that's really nice for ourselves, because we're going to be spending, ideally, we want our kids to grow up in the masjid. We want to be able to benefit from the masjid ourselves. It'll be like a place for us to hang out, right? We're going to have our community events there. So of course, we're going to, we're going to want to donate, and that's going to be from our wealth. That's not going to be stuff that we're not supposed to have, but it's going to be from within our wealth. And that's all good, and that's all to the benefit. And so, yeah, we do want to be able to at least understand and engage with the issue of zakah better than what we've been doing. And I think that, you guys as well with this podcast, I'm not the only one. I think that, and part of it is that, this issue with zakah and how Muslim leaders and Muslim institutions are treating zakah, I think is resonating with a lot of folks, right? I think that is happening. But sometimes, somebody just has to say it out loud, right? I think sometimes what does happen is, when I wrote about Islamic Relief, it's actual employees, right? So it was an employee who brought this issue up to me. And it took me like over a year to actually write about it. Actually, even when I wrote about MPAC, it took me over a year to figure out whether I'm going to write about it. It just, sometimes it takes a while for me to actually figure out, do I even want to address this subject, right?
Yeah.
What will people think? Will I lose friends? Will clients get angry with me? Or,
do you get worried about that?
I mean, I did at the beginning. I think especially when I wrote about MPAC, because I knew there were a lot of people that were close to MPAC, that were clients or that were friends, and it wasn't really that bad at all. I mean, in terms of what had happened. In fact, I think that the articles that I wrote on CVE remained fairly impactful from my perspective, and definitely encouraged me to continue this whole path of just writing, because it does help me learn. It helps me understand things better. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think that, and not just that, but it expands the number of people who I get to know and I get to meet, and engage with and learn from. So I think that overall it's been beneficial. And yeah, I mean, in general, I mean, people I talk to, my clients, they tend to love my articles. So, yeah.
So right now, do you have any specific organization that you would endorse and say, you know what, there's a cap policy in the back end on this one, looks like it's actually just going to poor people? Like, this is, you would put your, you put your stamp of approval on that?
Well, okay. So, I mean, there are places where I donate, like, personally, right? So, my local masjid has a Zakat committee, right?
Yeah. ICOI?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. ICOIs is great.
Yeah. So I definitely donate there. I've donated to Uplift, which is also here a local organization.
Got it.
I've been writing a lot this Ramadan about international organizations, or organizations that donate internationally.
Yeah.
And I would have to say that I personally I've been doing this thing about like what their domestic overhead is and how high or low it might be. Yeah. I'm still very uncomfortable donating zakat internationally to any of these organizations. Yeah. One organization that I am going to be writing about shortly, I mean, I don't know when your podcast is coming out, but I'll hopefully write about it soon, is UNHCR, and the UNHCR Zakat Fund.
UNHCR.
That's the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. It is
United Nations.
Yes, absolutely. So the UN, there are various UN programs that actually take zakah. I mean, the World Food Program does, the one the one that operates in the West Bank and Gaza, they actually have a zakat. In Lebanon, Palestinian refugee camps, they operate a zakat fund. I don't like any of those from what I've seen so far.
Neither do I.
I would say that the main difference is how incredibly well documented it is. I have some qualms about it for sure. I'm like, some of this looks really, unsettling in some ways. And I'll write about that as well as to why it's a little bit unsettling, but why I think it is far and away, and it's not even a close contest, why it's far and away the best zakat for international that is available.
You say it's the best.
Oh, it is far and away the best in international giving for zakat.
To give to the United Nations.
Not just to the United Nations, but
that particular org.
to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, they have a zakat fund. And it is a 100% cash hand to hand. So you give $1,000 to them, and $1,000 in cash goes to a needy family that is a refugee.
Who's administering this? Are there Muslims that are doing this?
So this is actually the problem. Of course, so the UN is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. They exist because of a UN convention. So it's an international convention. The High Commissioner for Refugees is supposed to be there to administer it. They have status in places where there are where there are refugees, with the exception of like Palestine, or there are some exceptions where they just don't operate. But a very large number of these refugees are Muslim, and so they have a process of segregating the funds. So if you donate, then it goes straight to a bank account in Geneva. That's interest-free, and then from there it's distributed in cash to people who are registered as refugees. So these the organization is paid. The organization has overhead. It's covered by governments, by and large, right? And then there's these auxiliary organizations that fundraise to augment what it is that they're doing. And so there are some issues and criticisms, but they are. Compared to how Muslim organizations operate, they are remarkably transparent in how they do things. They actually have had Muslim organizations, one organization, go over and audit it and look at, talk to people who have received the zakah, and kind of checked it out. They've had some criticisms as well. They've had some issues that they figure that you can just do this better. But it is, from what I can tell. Obviously, I haven't done this. I haven't done all the back end work myself to look into it.
Yeah.
But it appears to be exactly what they're saying it is. And it's a 100% hand-to-hand distribution. I think that some of the major criticisms that you have is that it's not a Muslim organization, right? It's a secular organization. Part of it is, of course, it's a convention that includes, they actually have. They have some semblance of authority to be where they are, and they have some exclusivity with respect to dealing with refugees. The other aspect of it is just sovereignty. And I was talking to one of my friends, who's a sheikh, who, about UNHCR, is the concern that he brought up. Actually, a couple of people brought this up. Is sovereignty? Is that the notion that you're giving up our worship to a secular non-Muslim organization.
Exactly.
Now maybe the Disney Corporation can do a much better job with Hajj, right?
Because they're good at logistics.
They'll probably do a really good job. But maybe we should just, accept that the Saudis are doing it, and that's cool too, right? And so
is it guaranteed the refugees are Muslim, the ones who receive it?
So they say that all of it goes to Muslims.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it goes. So the zakat goes to Muslims. They have a number of fatwas from all over the world that people who have looked at it, and there's a lot of because they're not a non-Muslim, because they're a non-Muslim organization, they do not accept any administration, right? And then this is actually one of the things that came up with the fatwas. Okay, you're not a Muslim, so you're not going to be administrator for zakah, so you don't get any of the cheese, right? The other part of it is, there are two ways that administrators actually, I'm not administrators, but if you're operating as zakat, you get money from as a wakala, right? As essentially like an agent, or you get it from, as an administrator of zakat, which comes from the Quran. And they get money from neither of these things. They give simply cash to Muslims. It goes to a bank account. All the refugees who are entitled to the cash payments to sustain them, they get retinal scans. So that way you make sure that there isn't any duplicate distribution or anything like that. One of the other issues, and this was a criticism from one of their auditors, is what happens in the event that what happens in the event that you get somebody who gets zakat? Do they actually know that this came from the Muslim community? Because remember, these are refugees. They've been forced to flee their homes. They are probably thinking that the Muslim Ummah has abandoned them, right? And one of the purposes behind having UNHCR develop this program is to let Muslim refugees know that this is actually funded by Muslims, individual Muslims, and that the Muslim community has not abandoned you, right? Now, the problem that they found, though, is that this wasn't really necessarily being communicated to the refugees. So they don't necessarily know if it came from the zakat or from some random government somewhere, right? And now I'm told that in at least one country, they started to notify the zakat eligible people that, okay, this is zakat money, and this came from the world Muslim community, people who actually paid their zakat for this, so that they know that the Muslim community hasn't abandoned you. They haven't really done this everywhere, but they're apparently going to start implementing that.
And that's one of the benefits. That's one of the goals of zakat, is to make the relation between the rich and the poor, to close that gap so that there isn't animosity. So like, okay, I'm poor, but I don't hate rich people just because by virtue of being rich.
So you don't have like class warfare. That's
exactly.
Now.
They're supporting me. I'm not broke. I'm not on the streets because they're paying their zakat as Allah intended it to be.
Right. So I feel like zakat, it should be hand to hand.
Dr. Shadi said the same thing. It should be literally cash for cash.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not cash for service for you, but like you literally have to give them the money in hand.
So right now, what we have with zakat
or international organizations, said I have a lot of contentions with them. So let's use the one you wrote about. Islamic Relief has a U.S. branch and a worldwide branch.
Right.
So what's the problem? They're the same. They're Islamic Relief. I guess Islamic Relief, one big umbrella, right? So what's the problem if I give zakat one or the other?
I wouldn't necessarily state that I would just go with Islamic Relief Worldwide or Islamic Relief USA. I just do think that Islamic Relief Worldwide is plainly superior, primarily because of its zakat policy, right? So they've had some shuyukh that have looked at the zakat policy, and they've put some restrictions on how funds are supposed to be used. Islamic Relief USA doesn't really abide by those restrictions. Now they came up with a new zakat policy that just is so full of holes that they just don't have any restrictions at all. And Islamic Relief USA is it's a very overhead heavy organization. So
Islamic Relief USA.
And
do they distribute zakat? They don't, right? Or don't they just give it to Islamic Relief Worldwide?
Yeah. So
they're in the business. They're primarily in the business of, you could say they're primarily in the business of collecting the zakat, not distributing it.
Well, I mean, their main job is just to be like their main job is to collect zakat and send it to the UK, right? That's their main job. Now they do spend money here. I mean, they're probably one of them, they're very big on spending money here. If you have like an event and you want it sponsored by Islamic Relief, they'll especially if you have an event with doctors or something, yeah, of course they'll pay for all the doctors' dinners or whatever. They'll do a lot. They'll go out of their way to help out. And sponsor events, especially events with like the affluent, or they'll do interfaith things, and they'll do a bunch of things that are marketing related as well. And they have a lot of employees.
Per their policy, these kinds of marketing efforts, does that also come out of zakat, or is that not? Does that part of it like a sadaqah fund or something?
No,
else?
it really does. It comes out of zakat. So
fantastic.
Yeah. The Google advertising comes out of zakat. Facebook advertising, Instagram, all that stuff comes out of zakat. So zakat can be used for a wide range of purposes under the way Islamic relief handles it. And so, the idea here is, well, like there are two ways that you would handle it, right? I mean, zakat is one is the hand-to-hand distribution.
Yeah.
Then the other is sort of kind of this newfangled programmatic zakat, right? Where and this isn't necessarily like new in a lot of ways. So say for example you have a madrasa in South Asia, right? And the donor wants to give zakat to the madrasa. They're not going to do hand-to-hand zakat to like, an 11-year-old kid. That's not what they'll do. They'll be like, okay, what we're going to do is we'll take the zakat and we're going to pay this. We're gonna give this kid 3 squares a day, place to live, and an education. That's what we're going to do with the zakat, right? Zakat donor is going to be like, yeah, fair deal. That's makes sense to me, right? So what you're essentially doing though when you do this is, well, you have a zakat administrator and they're taking money, zakat money that was put in their right pocket, they're moving it to their left pocket, and then they're providing some sort of a service or benefit to a beneficiary. And that's sort of like, that's where programs come in. Now, what nonprofits will then do, they might not necessarily account for this or tell anybody, but what makes this sort of halal as to what it is that they're doing is that we're just acting as a wakil for these people. And instead of providing them with money, we'll give them services. So we'll do a job training program, or we're going to build a well, or we're going to, build this school or this thing that that's going to be beneficial to the community. We're not actually going to give you money. And part of it is this notion that you've got to infantilize poor people, and you have to assume that they're going to make really bad decisions with money that you give them. And part of it is this ideology that people have about development, that zakat should be used, or money in general should be used to develop things. And that might be the wrong. I mean, maybe it might be okay when it comes to some sort of charitable stuff, but that's a relatively recent iteration of how zakat's supposed to work, right? Because that's not, if you just assume that the people that are beneficiaries of zakat are just going to make infelicitous decisions with money that you give them, and instead we need to have this professional class of people that are going to just
administer and make the decisions and make sure that these poor people are not spending it frivolously.
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
though it's their complete right. If they want to burn it to keep themselves warm, they're more than welcome to do that.
Well, I mean, the idea is that you're going to, say you want to do a feeding program, you're going to get a bunch of rice and lentils and maybe some chicken or something like that, and you're going to feed like 100 people. You can do that, or you can just give them money and they can just go and buy. They can go money get. They can figure out what to do. Maybe they can buy their rice and lentils cheaper. Maybe they can, maybe they have something else that they want to do with the money.
Yeah.
There might be some choices that they might make. Now, they might not all be good choices, but nonprofits, when they do their spending, it might not be good choices either. There might be some corruption, nepotism. There might be some, there might be a lot of, there are decisions being made about where to spend the money, who to spend it with. There isn't a lot of accountability necessarily. We don't necessarily know what's happening. I don't think there's a lot of accountability.
There's zero accountability.
Right.
I mean, you have shuyukh and you have scholars that maybe review the policies, but I don't really think you have people month to month, year by year doing a full accounting of.
No one does a zakat audit. They may do taxes, administrative audit of like an org. But no one's doing a zakat audit.
I don't think there's anyone doing a zakat audit like Hafsa does the halal audit, right? They just show up and that doesn't exist, right?
Yeah. So normally what happens is that we normally with nonprofits there are these restricted funds, right? So sometimes you get a grant from some foundation, and the foundation says you can only use the money for this and so, and that's all you can use it for.
Yeah.
Zakat should be restricted, but it almost never is. And so nonprofits can basically use it as a slush fund to do whatever they want with. Now, we can account for what happens, and this is my problem with nonprofits in general in the United States that give overseas, is that we know what happens in the United States. And what happens in the United States, well, depending on your perspective, is just horrifying a lot of the times because the overhead is very, very high. The salaries are high. The marketing costs are high. A lot of the times they're just shouting over each other, it's very high expenses. But once it goes overseas, it's just a black box. And so, like UNHCR, I think they actually have an accounting for what happens to the money overseas. They actually will tell you. They actually have some numbers. I mean, not going to be perfect or anything, but they have something, right? And so, a lot of the times, it's pretty bad with American nonprofits. There was one Canadian nonprofit I was looking at. It was like one of those frequently asked questions on the website. Well, how do you know that the money is going where it's supposed to be going? And the answer was, you need to look at our Instagrams. You have to look at our Instagram page. Our Instagram page shows what we're doing, right?
Look, as someone who's in media speaking here, you can just buy photos. I'm not saying this organization did it. You can use stock pictures. You can doctor pictures. You could literally do anything and put it on our Instagram. I can do the same thing here. Like, it's not that right. Should not be a proof. Proof that no, you need documentation. You need receipts.
So that's the conversation we were having. That's very
irritating. Can I actually tell you a funny story? This happened like 2 weeks ago at one of these Qiyam programs. Islamic Relief had a table, and I have friends that work in Islamic Relief, a lot of them actually. Sure. And this has nothing to do with the people that work in Islamic Relief. They're all beautiful people that dedicate. A lot of them are overworked and underpaid, and they really do believe in the cause. So we're addressing these issues more of like a policy level, right? At an executive level. It has nothing to do with the common workers. But, they called me over and I was just chatting with them and your article came up that had just recently been published. And I was like, oh, did you guys read it? And they said, yeah. And I said, oh, well, what did you think of it? And they said, oh, I really, it was nice. And I just think he needs to do more research, And they're like, what do you think about it? And I said, well, to me, it seems like Islamic Relief USA is in the business of collecting zakat and not distributing it since it's all going overseas anyway. Why don't I forego the middleman and just give my money to Islamic Relief Global?
Yeah.
Right? It's same $60 here, $60 there, but it's less, more of my money is going to be used, right? And I kid you not, one of them looked at me and just said, maybe you should just stop talking. And I was like, okay, because there had donors and people there. And I said, okay, I'm sorry. And I just walked away. But,
right.
That's the, that's kind of the situation on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Right. I didn't really talk to, I guess, other than some comments that come around, occasionally from, and in the Islamic Relief example, one person who said that he was in development said that it would make a lot more sense. I mean, the costs, you shouldn't really look at costs because, would you rather use zakat money to feed a poor person or give it to, or feed a bunch of poor people, or take 3 members of Congress out to lunch and convince them to give more money to the poor. And any sane person, you can look at the comment. I'm just paraphrasing. Any sane person would say that it's the latter. You give money to members of Congress. And I was like, did you just make that up? I don't think Islamic Relief is actually claiming to do that. I mean,
no, I don't think so.
Right. That doesn't sound right.
Sounds like a care thing.
Right.
Well, I think so. His point.
No, but Islamic Relief does do government relations.
Wait, what?
They do.
Islamic Relief USA is part of government.
Yeah, they do. They do government relations. They do a lot of interfaith relations. They do a lot of they do a lot of those types of things. But whether they're going to be publicly claiming that they're using zakat for this purpose is another question. I haven't seen that they do that.
That's good.
But again, we don't have a separate zakat accounting. So one of the things that I would like to start seeing, right? I think zakat policies are relatively, almost not a thing in the United States until a year or so ago. They started out like in the UK. So there's The Islamic Council of Europe has a zakat policy. Islamic Relief Worldwide has a zakat policy, and so they kind of explain, well, we treat zakat differently. Then we saw, other organizations like Launch Good. Launch Good last year, I think, or the year before, they have a zakat policy that they hired a couple of shuyukh to come up with. Not obviously, if you've read my articles, I'm not endorsing Launch Good, just to be clear. But
I
they
think
did.
you called them a parasite on the Muslim
Yeah,
community.
do you stand by that? Do you stand by that statement?
I think that with
That was kind of harsh.
It was. I am. I think that when they are not disclosing to people that they are taking a commission-like structure, and that they are, it's essentially an algorithmic sort of commission that they are, that they're utilizing, where they can take up to half of the donation that you're giving to an organization that you think you're giving to in charity.
So can we
Furthermore,
break it down?
yeah.
Let's break it down, right? So how it works is, you can go on Launch Good, and
Right.
then you can see there's just regular people that are looking for help, and there's like specific programs or fundraising programs that are zakat eligible, right? And they can purchase like an advertising package on the back end with Launch Good, right?
Right.
And Launch Good will put them in the newsletter or bump them up to the front page, whatever, blast them on social media.
Sure.
And then depending on the time of, like, it's during Ramadan, right? Depending on what part of Ramadan you buy your advertising package in, it could be way more expensive. First week of Ramadan is like it's not that expensive, but if you're talking about the last 10 nights, then it's like, they may be asking for $20,000. But the $20,000, it's not necessarily me paying them up front. If Munir's Launch Good, I'm not paying Munir up front $20,000. It's they're going to take that cut from the donated money. Is that what it is?
Not exactly.
No?
So
Okay.
normally you're going to keep the money. Essentially, it's going to be like an escrow with Launch Good. So they pay the charge. They charge you up front, but they say that you at least get 1-to-1 back, or we give the money back. Right. So they're telling you that, well, if you don't make any money from this campaign, we're not going to charge you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do make money, we're going to charge you. All right. And so it's effectively that whole money back thing, and the fact that they are terming this as as an ROI of, with essentially a capped ROI of a quarter. It could be from a half to a quarter, not an ROI of half to a quarter, but the amount that they actually keep is half to a quarter. So it's going to either be,
So they're keeping that money out of the
2x or
escrow
4x.
account.
Right. So
From the escrow
it's not an escrow account, right? I mean, they're keeping it in a fund, but it's basically we're going to give you your money back type of a thing. So you're leaving your money in there with Launch Good as a charity,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're going to then they're going to initiate this campaign for you, and then they're going to take they're going to keep that commission, whatever it is that you raise. And they're telling you that it's going to be somewhere between 2x and 4x, if I recall.
So if you pay them
correctly.
$5K and you don't make $5K back on your campaign, they're like, okay, we'll just give you your money back. You broke nothing. Nothing happened. But then if you make the 10K, then we're going to keep that 5K. And now, but
Right.
then if
But
you made
pay
10K,
them. You pay them
5.
the $5K first.
Yes.
You have to.
Right.
But
You have to pay them the
but,
5K.
So your contention though isn't. I mean, this.
But
seems
even
like,
if you got 6K,
yeah,
they'll still keep the
so
5K.
you made that. Yeah.
Right.
You made 1,000. But my question would be, I mean, isn't that just marketing? Isn't that like they're marketing firm? Then they're making money
They
marketing Muslim orgs.
So
Isn't that a good thing?
there's a few issues with that. One is one is of course the zakat issue.
Well, Launch Good themselves, like if I'm zakat eligible, and I'm on Launch Good
You are the.
per these rules.
Right.
And say I'm part of this advertising campaign, I'm paying Launch Good. Launch Good themselves don't claim to be zakat eligible, right?
They don't. They don't claim to be zakat eligible, and what's more is under the zakat policy of Launch Good, they say that they cannot keep any zakat money for themselves.
Yeah.
Effectively, that's what they are doing, right? And what's more is that The two, I mean, I should only speak to. I only spoke with one of them, Yasser Berdis, who he did not have any knowledge of this marketing program, or the fact that you're charging actually for zakat for zakat eligibility, or it's not just the marketing program. You're charged an extra $5,000 just to be on their zakat page. So in addition to whatever it is that you're being marketed to be cited with the zakat page, it's going to be $5,000. And so that he didn't actually know about that and wasn't consulted on it. And so there were some examples that I found this year as well as last year of LaunchGood just brazenly ignoring their own zakat policies that they paid for marketing and got the endorsement of shuyukh to market this this particular platform. Now, the other thing that you mentioned is, isn't it good that they're marketing charities, etc.? Now, again, we're going into this issue of charity, right? If it's charity that they're doing, that's fine, right? I think that we have to also go back to the issue of zakat isn't charity, it's special, and we need to treat it specially. Put that aside.
Yeah.
If zakat is involved, it's just, in my mind, it's completely rancid. Now, zakat isn't involved, that's a different conversation. Then that's probably okay. But you need to follow state and federal law with respect to disclosing stuff, right? And that includes disclosures to various state attorney general's offices, because if you are a charity solicitor, that is a regulated area, and you need to actually follow the rules with respect to this. So there are specific rules that different states have that they've written, especially with things like crowdfunding, etc. There's also the Federal Trade Commission. I mean, you think about it, if you go to try to donate zakat through Google, and there's going to be a bunch of ads. What's Google going to tell you? These are ads, right? Yeah. And so it's important to let people who are being advertised to know that they are being advertised to. I should say LaunchGood does tell you it's sponsored when they get when they send an email on the website. For some reason, they have, it's been a little while since I've looked at it, so they might have changed it, but they have had a practice of simply not telling people that they're being advertised to. So I think it is important to disclose that to people. I also think that this is true, I think, of people who endorse LaunchGood or who endorse charities. I think this is true for a lot of shuyukh. There are shuyukh out there who are getting paid by charities, who are endorsing things and are not telling people. If they're doing a YouTube video, they're doing a video on Facebook, they're not actually telling anybody that they're being paid to endorse something. And I think it is important for people to know that, because they need to know what it is that they're paying for.
I mean, isn't that like fundraising 101? You can go to any gala, you go to any, even at the masjid sometimes. You're sitting there at 27th night, the sheikh who's up there talking, may or may not, I don't know. I don't want to spread these aspersions. Like, so everyone sitting in masjid, you're like, this guy's being paid. But I know of shuyukh, when they're fundraising, they're going to get 2%, 3% commission or whatever. And you know what? That shuyukh is brought in because he's going to make 20% more than what the masjid was going to make, because he's more articulate and more whatever else. But your contention is, why aren't you... Do the people know that he's taking 2%?
Well, the rule is that if that is going on, and yeah, you're right. I mean, I shouldn't say that, well, this is always happening, because it's not always happening. There are some people who are just like, obviously, I just said some nice things about UNHCR. I'm not going to personally donate to them, just to be clear. They're the ones I like the most. But yeah, they're definitely not paying me, right? And so...
Can we actually touch base on something you were talking about advertising?
Yeah.
And something that came up in your articles was the issue of surveillance advertising and why it's unethical, and why it seemed like there were some organizations, Muslim organizations, nonprofits, that are using this form of advertising.
Right.
Can you touch base on that a little bit? What is surveillance advertising, and why is it unethical, and why is it shady if a Muslim nonprofit org is engaging in this to target you as a consumer?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with just the notion of how you feel about being tracked, right?
Okay.
Or of being watched, and what websites you're actually visiting, and just this whole idea of your privacy and how you feel about that.
Okay.
Right? And so that's not just an issue with respect to Islamic organizations or Muslim organizations. It really just has to do with our general culture, business culture in the United States, and the idea that corporate surveillance is actually like a really big part of what's happening as a general matter. Now, when you talk in terms of zakah, right? That changes the subject a little bit.
So if I go on Facebook and I get an ad for Islamic Relief to donate my zakah, that is a targeted advertisement that is being specifically pushed onto me.
That's correct.
And that's what you have the contention with.
So, one of the things I wrote about last year was like, if I search for uplift,
Yeah.
right, and I'm going to see a whole bunch of ads, like maybe the first, second, and third might be Islamic Relief, right?
True.
And a lot of it, or it might be something else. There might be a number of other things. I mean,
For me,
uplifts-
it's Helping Hand USA. Every time
Right.
I was like doing research to write about this podcast, anytime
Sure.
I put anything to Google, didn't matter what I put. If it was Zakat related, Helping Hand came up first.
right. And there might be a number of reasons why that's happening. It might be different for you
Yeah.
than for me, and it might be, because of which website we visited or
Yeah.
what have you. But this also goes back to the issue of what's a zakat administrator, and why it is that this whole system that we've built with nonprofits is so incredibly wrong. And so, we talked earlier about zakat being really a tax, right? And the function of an administrator is really just being a tax collector, because that's a person that has the authority to go to your farm and count chickens and whatever livestock it is that you have, and find out what it is that you have, and then give you a tax bill or say this is what you owe, right? They have the ability to audit you or whatever. Now, a charity doesn't really have that, and so what's happening is you are donating to the cost of administrating of zakat is advertising, and you're often advertising to people who aren't paying zakat for you. So exactly what are you administering, right? So say, for example, you go there to Helping Hands website.
Sorry, actually, I need to correct that. It wasn't Helping Hands. It's Mercy Without Limits.
Mercy Without
For
Limits.
me, that's what's coming up, not Helping Hands. I
Okay.
wanted to make that clarification.
Okay, so Mercy Without Limits, they advertise to you, and you click on it. You just click on the ad, and that click, and as I understand it, pay-per-view and pay-per-click is basically the same thing. I mean, they've just kind of worked it out, so it's the same thing. But you click on it, and that click costs Mercy Without Limits, I don't know, pick a number, $7, right? And so that costs Mercy Without Limits $7. Now you decide you're not going to do that. You're not going to give to Mercy Without Limits. Instead, you're going to pay your zakat somewhere else, right? Who paid that $7? Well, somebody else who paid zakat, and their zakat wasn't administered with that $7. They were just advertised to, and so the problem is that you're wasting a whole bunch of zakat money trying to reach out to people, and often shouting over other charities. So if you're searching for one charity, you're going to get ads for a whole bunch of other charities. Now, that's very different from administering zakah as like a government would. I was looking at this before, like, we think in terms of taxes. The IRS, their budget is about 1/4 to 1/3% of what it is that they collect. It's like a fraction of the credit card charge fee. It's incredibly low to administer taxes. It's just a lot more efficient than if you're just a marketing, advertising operation. Marketing is very expensive.
They don't have to advertise, because we all know if we don't pay our taxes, they're going to be at our door with guns. It's the fear in the back of your mind, right?
Yeah,
so maybe if
I
Muslims
guess the
were more
problem is
God conscious,
exactly. If you're God more
if
than
you're
that,
God conscious,
Right, but but you're still not expanding the zakat pie by advertising. You're trying
it's
to
the same pie that we
you're-
all have
you're-
to share,
right?
Yes,
And you're
yes.
working for market share dominance, and so a lot of times, it's kind of remarkable, that there's one thing that's been going around the internet lately about penny appeal.
Penny
right?
Appeal UK.
Yeah, Penny Appeal UK, but it was some of it has to do with Penny Appeal Ghana, which is their orphanage was shut down because of some abuse a couple of years ago. And more, just a whole bunch of stuff. Now, Penny Appeal responded, and
It
they
was
said
the most pathetic thing I've ever seen. Did you read it? Did
I
you read their
did.
response?
I
It was just
did.
an ad hoc attack on the guy. They
Well,
didn't respond to any points.
also saying that he fundraises for Muslim aid, right? So this is really Muslim aid trying to, cut penny appeals legs off or something like that. Or it's really about nonprofits, and a lot of these nonprofits, unfortunately, do talk smack about each other all the time, right? It is something that it's a pretty normal thing for people, like, for example, if there's a charity out there that says we take 0%, as far as 0% administration on our
That's
zakah,
right, yeah.
and Islamic Relief and their people will tell you that's totally not true. That's not a thing. That's, maybe it's not. I don't know, but there is unfortunately a lot of competition among these organizations.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is very unfortunate, and sometimes it actually emanates, we'll see it in the form of this penny appeal stuff.
Yeah, I mean, to think that you have competing organizations talking smack about each other, saying, "Oh, yeah, these guys suck. I'm way better at giving money to poor people. I'm way better at distributing money to the needy." It's like, what do you,
Right.
Going back to like the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, like the spirit of zakat, I feel like this is just gone. Like that's not the intent of it. It's like,
It's charity. It's like you said, it's charity now, which is, I think, a very different way of viewing it. It's not how Allah talks about it.
Right,
no,
right.
It
That's a
should
good
be
point,
a
yeah.
huge amana. Like if someone's giving you the zakat to distribute, it should be a weighty thing. Like actually, like don't give me more. You shouldn't want to have more to distribute because it's more of a responsibility. Where it's like, no, I want all of the zakat. Give me all zakat. I'll figure it out. Fi sabilillah. Trust. And it's like that's part of the reason this podcast, like, oh, why don't you release more episodes? Why don't you produce more? This so and so thing happened in the news. Why don't you go talk about it? And it's like we try not to be a reactionary. We try to be very focused about the guests that we bring on and the discussions that we have, because it's like I don't want to just put random stuff out there and then like 2-3 years, turns out it was something completely bogus or stupid, and now all these people listen to it. I don't want that coming back to me on the day of judgment, right? I'm sure Munir feels the same way. So for some of these organizations, I feel like it shouldn't be a race to see who collects the most zakat. That what you were saying, I feel like that's just like a fundamental flaw in the philosophy of how these organizations are operating. And I mean, I don't know what we have to do as a community to get them to kind of shift their attitude or how they go about things, because it is kind of grimy for me to get an ad to donate my zakat to you. Like I know I have to donate my zakat. I don't need an advertisement for that. Right.
Actually,
So
on that topic of shifting attitudes, though, okay, so you have your newsletter. So to give the full title, it's the Working Towards Ihsan, and it's on Substack. I recommend it on my own Substack. I think it's great. And my question, though, is what's like the final goal? I mean, I know you write for your own knowledge, your own benefit. I understand that. Like when you write, a lot of times you're just writing for yourself, to do the research, to learn, to talk to people. I get that. But from your end, I mean, you have a topic you're addressing. Is the goal to drive change in terms of these other orgs? Like, do you want them to read, like you write about whatever, Penny Appeal or something. You're like, I hope someone at Penny Appeal reads this and like, wow, this is not good. And let's change our policies because of that. Doesn't have to be completely informed by what you say. They don't have to take your opinion per se, but to be like, you know what, there's something wrong here and let's fix it because of that. Or are you just calling them out? Are you a watchdog? Like what's your goal with it?
Right. So when I started writing about countering violent extremism, I mean, I think my goal was probably pretty clear. I mean, I want this destroyed, right? I mean, I want it to be. I want it to be retired with extreme prejudice, right? That's what
an easy one, yeah.
Right. That's pretty easy. When it comes to zakah, I think that is more of a process of learning. I mean, I think I've learned a lot more about zakat these past few years, and just in terms of forming an opinion and just developing just in terms of my own growth on the subject. I think that's important for me, and just I think part of it is I do definitely do write for myself, and I know learn a lot from a lot of other people. I also think that these organizations. I would like for them to change their policies. I think that I want to educate donors because I'm a donor myself, right? And so I don't write for nonprofits. And the way I kind of look at it is I'm not really doing it so that they improve their policies. If it happens, that's okay. That's good, right? But I really want for all of us to worship with ihsan and worship very specifically with zakah, right? And in the way we give in charity as well, more broadly, but obviously zakah is not charity. But I think it's in the title. I think all of us should want to improve ourselves, right? We want to be better. We want to be better next Ramadan than we were this Ramadan, right? I mean, if Allah gives us to see the next Ramadan, we want to be able to. We want to be able to do better than what we're doing this Ramadan. We want to be able to, whatever doing with Quran or with prayer, with dua, what have you. I think the quality of our charity should improve. And that might include, and some people, there might be somebody who might just create another hand-to-hand type of a zakat operation. I think that's such an incredible service that there are some people out there that take it upon themselves, especially if they're not taking any administration or anything like that, to go and find people who are in need of zakah and give them zakah. Right. I mean, I think that's just a wonderful service that people aren't doing enough. And the idea that, now it really needs to be done effectively for profit is just horrifying. But that we as people who are doing this as part of our worship are simply perpetuating a system that is rife with grift and has become a racket. Is something that we can do without. I mean, not a lot of people are necessarily going to read about it and think that that's what they need to do. But I think hopefully over time, as people, sort of have these conversations about zakah, like what are we doing? Are we just robotically calculating based on what somebody marketed to us and said, this is the zakat calculator and now give us this money and we're going to do whatever it is that we do with it without you ever thinking about what happens to it? It is important to understand what happens to your charity downstream. It is important to understand what kind of effect it is that it's having. You definitely don't want to be scammed. And unfortunately being scammed is, I think the quality of our worship suffers if that happens.
So this is in stark contrast to your writing. You're very soft-spoken and nice when you talk about it. But one of the contentions people have brought up to me in terms of your writing is it's very pointed. The tone, it's very like in your face of this. I mean, this is a parasite on our Muslim community. Like that's very pointed language. Do you find that might turn people away, or when they read this, like, oh, he's just trying to get clicks, or I don't know, whatever else people may take it as? Have you ever gotten that feedback? Or
I haven't gotten. You're actually the first ones that have brought it up, that have kind of objected to that language, or have brought it up that, okay, well, yeah, this is.
To be clear, I don't object to that language.
Okay.
I feel like
passing on other people's criticism.
I feel like, we Muslims, we're too soft,
Right,
I'm a nonprofit, don't bother, man up to your mistakes, like stop being
I think I'm violating a really fundamental, we were talking about this, a very fundamental Islamic principle. It's enjoying the good and then just stop talking. And so, what's happening with an organization like that? And I provided some examples as to why something like that should be regulated, right? If you are somebody who is, and I kind of asked this question before, and I on my newsletter, like a little thread about that. Well, what if the fundraising speaker said that I am taking 30% of the take today, and then starts giving his spiel about, and then starts quoting Quran and Hadith about why you should give to this cause? How would that affect your donation? How would that affect the night, right? And here you have Launch Good effectively doing the same thing at scale, right? And yet people are clamoring to defend them. Why? I mean, just because they've bought into it and maybe they've actually donated, and so maybe they have some confirmation bias because, they're not, they did something. They donated, and there's all this wonderful stuff here. There are these pictures of these children with wells and stuff like that, and it's all so good, right?
If they were upfront about it, would you change your opinion on launch good? If they're like, look, let's go the ideal scenario for you.
Yeah.
They get rid of the zakat, all that nonsense is like we're not going to bet anyone's zakat. We're not even going to let you. If someone says it, they're going to get a stamp of approval from us. Like you have to go vet that yourself. Also, we're aggregator of charities. So when you come on here, know that you're being advertised to. So like if you click on one, it'd be like little sticker instead of zakat eligible, it says like sponsored marketed content. Platinum tier. It gives you tiers or something like that. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Like would that change your
eligible as platinum tier?
Well, no, the zakat goes away. It just becomes platinum tier. Now you're like, oh, they paid the top dollar
This
to be
is a
advertised.
platinum zakat, baby.
Yeah.
Does that change your opinion? I mean, like at the end of the day, like I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that people are
I
putting
don't.
charities together.
I don't in principle have a problem with people who are charity solicitors, or with the notion that you can just advertise charity, or if there are people out there who are willing to donate to such things, I personally would not donate to something like that, right?
Yeah.
I know that there might not, like think about the user experience. If you looked at the website of LaunchGood, and it was like, advertisement, everything was an advertisement, and you're not seeing anything that's organic. It's just all advertising. What would that, how, it would just, some people might be turned off. Some people might be, it sounds like a good cause, and I like LaunchGood, and this is a really cool guy or whatever, and they might do it, right? As long as they know what they're doing, then there isn't really a problem with donor intent, right? You're not actually like subverting donor intent, right? Because just it's the same example with MPAC, right? I mean, do I have a problem with MPAC asking people for money, just as a general matter? I mean, I have a problem with them asking for,
I have a problem with them in general.
In general, right?
In general, forget the money part. It's just them in general. We have issues with them.
Right, so. Of course. But I mean, they represent seemingly a segment of the Muslim community that identifies with them and their politics and their worldview. I mean, there's plenty of people who think that Sisi was right massacring all those people. That's cool, right? And then there's. And MPAC is the group for those people, right? And so that's I'm not necessarily that MPAC endorses that, but they totally endorse Sisi. And so anyway, that's their organization. Of course, I don't really have I wouldn't still have very many nice things to say about it, but I wouldn't say that they're engaging in deceptive practices in their donations, right? If they use a charity solicitor, file a form with the Attorney General, right? You do that. Go to the Attorney General, file a form, file your reports, tell people you're advertising to them, do that platinum tier, stay away from zakat. Just stay away from zakat completely. I don't care how many shuyukh you can have you can have a whole bunch of bodyguards as shuyukh, telling you that okay, yeah, everything is fine or what have you. I still think that is they're still trying to find a way to advertise and collect money from zakah. I mean, and yeah, if you're mooching off of zakah, I mean, I think that's a pretty horrible thing, and I think that that should be considered worse than calling people who are mooching off of zakah parasites. I think that I think it's fundamentally wrong what LaunchGood has been doing. Maybe I'm the only one saying it, right? I mean, maybe I'll be the only one that'll ever say it, and everyone else will think that's fine.
For the record, I didn't know they did that either. Full disclosure, I used LaunchGood 6 years ago now when I used it. So, but at the time it wasn't. I didn't know. They didn't have all these tiers and stuff like that. So if anyone, my friends watching this, I had no idea. It wasn't like a thing back then. It was all organic actually at the time. But
and I think maybe.
So it looks like it's developed.
And look, I really don't want to. I don't think that this necessarily discredits everybody who advertises on LaunchGood, and I think that there are a lot of really good causes on LaunchGood. Of course, LaunchGood.
It's a way to market. If no one is going to find you, like my Facebook friends of 20, like what are they going to do, right?
Right. I mean, I don't think that I don't think it's fair to
we're not trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. We want organizations to adapt, to change, for the benefit of not just themselves, but of the entire Muslim community, because at the end of the day, we're having an inter-dialogue here,
Right.
We want things to be different.
I mean, there are definitely shady organizations on LaunchGood. I mean, it's a pretty open platform, right?
They vet somewhat, but I'm sure you could like get around it pretty easily.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's almost the last time I checked, there's almost 8,000 campaigns
That's incredible.
on
Yeah,
LaunchGood,
there's
right?
no way they're going to.
They have a limited staff. I mean, just it's not even, you don't even have to cast aspersions against them to know that, okay, there's just no way that they can actually vet all of that, right? Now they might vet campaigns for their marketability. They say they do that, right? They don't vet as part of their terms of use. It's just all buyer beware.
They don't vet the org. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Because they review it. Like before you launch, they actually have a mandatory, like they team you up with someone on their
Right.
team. They read through it all and they be like, oh, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? They'll actually have ideas like, oh, put a picture here or move that there. But
So
then, they're not vetting the person.
actual
They're
use.
not actually, they're not actually going, they're not going into the weeds of this organization. That's not their function, right? So the organization itself can be a total scam.
Yeah, you're Zakat Lover org, and like that's what your name is, Zakat Lover org. Like they're not gonna vet that. It's like, okay, he loves Zakat.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You
Right.
can have like, if I had $50,000 cash and I had all these beautiful stock photos and some Chat GPT generated copyright, I could make my own campaign and advertise it and vet it, and it's all of these AI generated images, and I can collect a buttload of zakat, and there's no one that's going to check up on whether I actually did anything with it.
I mean, that's not just a LaunchGood thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
don't use that as an idea to
yeah.
commit.
I worry about that.
This fraud.
Yeah, that's your whole point, right? Is like that's
it's
the
not-
issue with all over Muslim America zakat.
Yeah.
Well, not all. Many of the policies, there's no oversight. That's the
There's
issue.
just
We're
complete
saying
lack.
We wrote something in an FAQ if you dig deep enough.
Right.
And when you get to it, when you actually click on the question and open it up and read it, you're like it's one paragraph, and you're like, but where's the proof of this? Or and that's a very loose definition. Like, what does that actually mean? What's holding you back from sending out on everything? Like, it doesn't seem to have any rules of anything.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, right now, going through, like these, there are these organizations out there that really care about Zabiha, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
they will follow the entire chain, right? They'll go
Militant in some cases.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. They'll go through everything. They'll go through the feed. They'll go through the whole. Yeah, they'll watch every single step of the process, and they care deeply about it, right? But
we don't have that for zakat.
we don't, and it's harder. Honestly, it's going to be a lot harder to do.
It's like forensic accounting at some point, right?
You need an auditor.
You need an actual
auditor to go there and audit
someone,
their accounts, but
I
only
mean,
for zakat.
I think one of the things that we should probably get used to, though, especially with international organizations, is maybe organizations that don't accept zakah. I mean, that don't accept zakah. We should probably support them even more, right? If there are organizations that say we do all of this work that's charitable in nature, right? I mean, I'd love to see an explicitly Muslim organization that does international, global, work, relief work, poverty work, all of that stuff, and they don't accept zakah, right? I mean, I'd love to see that. That just doesn't exist. I think that we, as a Muslim community, if we associate our charity with just zakat, and that's it. I mean, we're just doing it wrong. First of all, zakat, like we talked about, isn't charity. But if all you're doing is giving in zakah, you're an incredibly miserly person, right? So if we actually get used to having organizations that, of course they're accountable and they do good work, if that ever really does happen, but if they just start using zakah as a crutch and try to get all of these fatwas that allow them to do whatever they want with zakah, and then say, well, and then also go to donors and the sheikh says it's okay, then let me just give my money, right? I mean, I think that we should have a lot more critical thinking as donors.
Yeah.
When we see this stuff. When that happens, because it's really just going to come from the donors. It's not coming from the shuyukh. It's not coming from the world of fiqh. It's definitely not coming from nonprofits.
Yeah.
It's going to come from individual donors that are going to make discriminating choices about how it is that they worship, where they literally how they worship, how they give in charity, all of that stuff. They need to start thinking about these things. And I hope, of course I'm writing about this stuff, but I hope. I hope I'm not the only one. I hope other people will do that and not be afraid of calling actual parasites sometimes.
I think one of the things that we had touched on in the previous podcast we did with Dr. Owamer was the lack of imagination within the current Muslim community. We just have a lack of imagination in how we can aspire to do greater things. and this is something I talked to Munir about before. I actually heavily dislike the idea that every single Muslim organization out there is a nonprofit. Why? One, it makes you more susceptible to like kuffar that are trying to, dig up dirt on you or come attack you in any way. A lot of your information is out online. You have to have public disclosures about certain financial statements. Why can't we just have our Muslim organizations be for profit? What's the distinction between what's the benefit that you are quote unquote nonprofit? I don't think it makes you any holier than thou. I don't think you, I feel like, some of these organizations, like for example, if Islamic Relief could be a for-profit company, okay? And then they say, we're providing, or not, sorry, not, let's use, Islamic Relief, and they provide a certain level of service here to the Muslim community, and then they collect funds. Maybe they're, either it's just sadaqah or they're selling something to you as a service and that you can purchase it. And then that's how they fundraise. That's how they are making money as a company. And then they have their own zakat, policy on the side that it's like this, whatever money that you go into here, that has nothing to do with our operations, our salary, our marketing. This exists in its own world, right? So, but and then now when the companies are operating this way, they're no longer thinking I'm a nonprofit. I need to figure out a way to raise more money for my operations. They have to be thinking of what kind of service can I be providing for the Muslim community so that they are willing to give me their dollar for me to operate.
I think your answer is a tax write-off, because if I donate to, I don't know, Disney, I can't write it off as a.
You can if you are doing some business, it's a LLC. You can say this is entertainment for my client, and you can write that off. That's not
me as a donor to Disney, like a for-profit company.
You're buying a Disneyland ticket.
Yeah,
you could write that off.
And how's your zakat? Your Disneyland ticket's not zakat eligible.
No, I'm just saying.
I don't even think MPAC would agree with that.
No. I don't know why he brought up Disney. I was just saying in general, these Muslim organizations, maybe they need to get out of the mindset of I'm a nonprofit, I'm just doing all this good in the world. Maybe you need to be for profit, provide a service to the community, and now you have this.
That was my point. Was a lot of these people are nonprofit because one, they don't have anything to sell you besides like we do good for people. And then if they were for profit and they didn't, let's say they were they were doing the exact same thing, but as a non-profit, for-profit company. Well, all those big Muslim donors, they're like, I want a sheet that comes back from you that says I donated to a nonprofit, so take that out of my taxes.
Got it.
Right. I gave you $20K. I want that I don't want to give Uncle Sam $20K.
Okay.
That's probably why most of them are nonprofit.
So I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of Muslims in private practice. There are like obviously people who make a living as doctors, and then they do certain types of work. I mean, I do this estate planning stuff.
I'm sure you do estate planning.
Yeah.
I'm sure if you don't accept zakat, even though you could say, oh, if I have a Muslim poor needy family that they need estate planning and they can't afford it, they'd be zakat eligible, and
they probably don't need estate planning.
Yeah, like they'll
I know, but they need someone to write a will or something.
Well,
you need some sort of level of.
There's some free wills out there. It's entirely possible for them to it's normally for an estate planning attorney, you're going to probably be somebody who pays zakat, not somebody who gets zakat paid to them in general. But aside
I'm not
from
saying
that,
zakat like I'm paying it to you. I'm saying it for you to administer to someone who needs your services.
No. I understand what you're saying. Now, as far as like private corporations being zakat administrators, I think that's actually a very interesting idea. The way that you might do it is very similar to say something like like a financial services institution. Say for example, like a Fidelity. Or Fidelity, I think, has the largest donor advised fund. Yeah. Now, donor advised fund is basically like it's a charity. It's not really a charity because for the most part, people don't actually give anything in charity from there, but they get a charitable tax deduction for donating to. Donating to a charitable cause. A donor advised fund is what it's called. It's called a donor advised fund. It's basically a 501c3, and all they do is that if you want to give a grant, like say for example, you want a charitable tax deduction this year, and you don't know of any good charities to give any money to right now.
Yes.
So you just want to hold it in some sort of a charitable account, and maybe you'll give it later, right? And so you can get your tax deduction now. And so that's what a donor advised fund is. They are enormous. One of the things that they can do, and this is Fidelity, a for-profit organization, and they have a nonprofit that kind of functions along with them. So one thing that could potentially happen, for example, is a financial services company. So say, for example, a halal investment operation. They'll say, invest with us. We have we're going to do hand-to-hand zakat. That's going to be one of the benefits. So you're going to invest with us. We'll take commission on whatever your investments are. If you want us to pull out 2.5%, or it's not going to be 2.5%, we'll calculate your zakat based on earnings, or whatever it is whatever formula it is that they're utilizing. We're going to take it. We're going to pull that out. And then we're going to distribute it hand to hand, and we won't take any administrative costs for that. We're going to charge you for investment services, right? But we're not going to charge you as administrators of zakat. I think that would be a really, really good idea. But you're probably going to need some sort of a nonprofit organization to make that happen. I think for the reasons that you had mentioned was the tax situation, is that maybe you want to give people a tax benefit, and it's relatively easy to do.
That's just paperwork at the end of the day. That's not. I mean, it's not.
I mean, it's possible because this is what other organizations do that are probably somewhat similar. So it is possible to devise a business model that does that.
Yeah.
Do you want to actually rely on that, or are there going to be downsides to that? Maybe, I suppose. But I think that we should probably. I think that it's true that we should look at things a little bit more creatively.
Yeah.
I'm generally somebody who's been kind of sour on nonprofits. These past few years, probably just because of what I've been seeing. I don't know. I'm just that's probably a little bit unfair, and because I think there are a lot of good people in the nonprofit space who want to do good work in all kinds of nonprofits. But yeah, there is the issue of just making sure that donors understand what's happening. And it really is. I don't think just complaining necessarily about organizations is at the end of the day going to actually help things.
It's the first step in moving in the right direction.
Absolutely,
you have
it
to
does.
point out the problem.
You do have to
start thinking about a solution. Otherwise, if it's not talked about, no one's going to bother even thinking about. Because if it wasn't for your articles, I would have never thought about this. It's like, oh, Zakat eligible. Here you go. Here's my money.
Right.
I would have never given a second thought about it. So this is the first step.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is important to actually write about it. I don't want you to discredit that and saying, oh, we shouldn't just call them out. I think it's important.
No, I think it is important to call. Obviously I've been doing it, but I think that shouldn't be the end, right?
No,
I mean, I think that once we find that there is a better way to do things, we should also point out and highlight the better ways as well. And a lot of times the better ways might be from like a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
How do we eliminate poverty? And also just in general, when there are Muslims that are out there who are just not telling the truth about what's happening or hiding things from within the Muslim community, and they might be really prominent.
Liars, as we call them.
Yeah, I mean, that unfortunately has been happening within the Muslim community, right? Yeah. We had initially talked about that thing. There was a Zakat eligible organization. They provide mental health services, right? And yeah, and you want to be able to make people think that, okay, oh my God, this is horrible. We're all Muslims just because they're Muslims are.
We're gonna kill ourselves.
Yeah, we're all killing ourselves now. Yeah, because because we're not atheists or something, right? And people are selling a bill of goods to the Muslim community. And Muslim community are like, oh my gosh, that's so great. I mean, that's so special or so important. that work is so important and so scholarly or whatever. And it is important to point these things out.
Yeah, and just for the listener, I don't want sometimes we have an overly pessimistic discussion. I don't want anyone to get completely jaded by, your Muslim scholars or, the things that are happening. More often than not, your local masjid, your local imam, your local group, they're more than enough, and they're excellent in the services that they provide for you. A lot of people
don't realize your local masjid probably has a zakat collection, and they're I know in the Bay Area when I was there, MCA.
Yeah.
You could give zakat to them, or even SBIA, another one up in the Bay. And then if someone wanted it, they had to go through an entire application process.
Yes,
it was not arbitrary, and it was for the people local to there. You would give it to them in paper. Here's my application, and then they would accept or reject you. Even I know people got rejected, so it depends. It wasn't just anyone who applied.
Definitely check it out. Even local zakat, just know what the process is, that there is a process. I think with local zakat, sometimes it could be hit or miss as well. I know that, You
want to hear a funny story? There's a local masjid. I'm not going to say the name because I think they shut down, but they had like a donation box, right? And it's like zakah, sadaqah.
Right.
Oh, right. I know this is going.
Right. And then whatever masjid expenses, you put the money in, right?
Yeah.
But you put the money in and it's just different slits, but they all go to the same box. At the end of the day, you just open up the lid and it's just a pile of money, so it doesn't matter where you put it.
What's their intention, brother?
You know what I mean? So it's just wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. It's all just, You want to avoid that. Maybe do a little bit of due diligence just to make sure there's some sort of logistical planning going on in your masjid. But
sometimes you need the right carpenters to build the boxes for you, right? I think one local masjid that I know about was, they had a problem where they were collecting a lot of zakah, but they didn't really have a process for distribution. So the money was just sort of sitting there for a long time, right?
Yeah.
And so it is important that, and it's not necessarily a bad intention or anything like that. It's just that you need volunteers and you need people who actually take the responsibility. Collecting zakah is almost easy compared to going out and vetting people and finding people who actually need the zakah. And maybe it means not just getting people to come to your office window and ask for zakah and filling out an application, but actually going out into a community and finding out who are the people who are in need of zakah, and then of course accounting for that and all of that stuff, and doing that on a volunteer basis without really any administration or anything like that is. It's a lot to ask, but I think it's just an incredibly valuable service. And there are a lot of Muslims that are doing it. So you're absolutely right. I think local is really good. It actually pains me though, in a lot of ways, because I think that these international organizations, all of them like Penny Appeal or Islamic Relief, or all of them, they're not wrong in the sense that there is an enormous amount of need outside of the United States. Yeah. And I think that here in the US, there's, we're at the top of the heap of a huge amount of global inequity and wealth.
Yeah.
And I think that, and of course, we have a social safety net. There might be quibbles about how good it is or what have you, but there's a massive amount of need overseas. And if there was a way to give zakah to people overseas, I think a lot of us come from immigrant families. I know that with my mom, she's from Africa with an Indian background. She had families she knew people that were in her extended family that needed zakah, and that's where the zakah went, right?
Yeah.
Now those people they're not zakah eligible anymore. That was decades ago, and so we don't actually know people that are zakah eligible.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case with, if you have, if you have people that 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 are zakah eligible, that's what should happen. That's where it goes. But I think that if we're able to actually, if we're able to have a system both for zakah and also not for zakah that was accountable, that there was really good transparency about it. They had really good policies in place. They didn't lie to people. They didn't fudge their numbers or anything like that. If all of that happened, I mean, I would be 100% for it.
Yeah, and to touch base about what you were saying about donating overseas, a lot of the times we do have these mass crises that happen overseas, and as a Muslim, you feel compelled that you have to give money, and more often than not, these global organizations are our only options, because you actually can't just send someone money who needs help in Turkey unless you know them and you can do some sort of crypto thing. It's very difficult to send money like that. I mean, one time there was a Syrian family refugee here in America that came, and someone was collecting money for them. And I sent money via PayPal to the person collecting, and I said, for the Syrian family. My PayPal account was locked out for 3 weeks.
Yeah, you can't say Syria.
And due to like terrorism, and I had to do all this.
Palestine, same thing.
Yeah. So you don't have another option but to do these. And so again, we're mainly focusing on the collection and distribution of zakat, and that's kind of our main focus. But this should not prohibit you from going to these organizations and giving as much money as you can for sadaqah, right? Because like you said, it's not, yes, we have to pay our 2.5% tax on your wealth, but we have to be generous. We have to, it's not just your zakat that should be going overseas or locally here. You do have to continue.
Zakat is supposed to inspire you to be able to give more. It's supposed to get rid of that stinginess in your heart. Like, okay, every year I'm forced to give. Okay, well, that wasn't so bad. I guess I can give a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, whatever else.
And whatever you give in the sake of Allah, Allah will only multiply it. It's not, you're not losing, so that's.
Yeah, the zakat money was never yours in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
That's for zakat.
But sadaqah obviously multiplies.
But I mean, if we had organizations that also handled sadaqah, and because I think that it's also important to make sure that we know what's happening with that money, that it's really of benefit. And I think some of the benefits of zakah, the type of hand-to-hand distribution that happens with zakah, it kind of makes sense to do that with charity as well. I think that there are studies on this about the best kind of charity is literally giving money to poor people.
Right? Charity done by like non-Muslims?
No, in general.
In general, I mean, in general, and that includes charity given by non-Muslims. And so there are actual charities that have been set up that give cash gifts to the poor, right? I mean, like an organization like Give Directly, for example, that's their model. I think they take a relatively small percentage, primarily doing things like surveys and of finding out what people do with their money. Normally, people get money, they do good things with the money. I mean, they'll buy books for their kids, or they'll start a business, or whatever the case may be. I mean, normally it really helps people get out of poverty, right? As opposed to
like in-kind gifts are probably like one of the worst ones you give, because in-kind, like if I gave, like Tom's shoes is a great example. Tom's shoes is great. For every shoe you buy, I give a shoe away to whoever, some kid in Africa.
It like destroyed the
destroys the local economy. Not every shoemaker's out of job. You just destroyed them. But if I had given them $20 for every shoe you buy, I give $20 to the kid. So the kid's like, oh, I need shoes. Let me go to the shoemaker here. So now I've spurred the economy on, and now it's where we have a means locally. They have an expertise, and now I need a shoe cleaner. Now I need a shoe recycler, and I need a shoe. Now we have an economy.
Yes. And that goes with any of these programmatic zakat or even charity stuff that goes on. Well, we're going to do a feeding program. Or feeding programs, it just sounds awful to me. Just give people money and let them go to a restaurant, right? I mean, you're helping somebody who has a small business, or a grocer or whatever. I mean, let the
makes sense in like a refugee camp, but yes, I get your like the general population.
In a refugee camp, maybe you might feed people, but there's also an economy around the refugee camp. I mean, the UNHCR distribution is cash, right? I mean,
and it's going to refugees.
It's going to refugees. So I mean, I have no problem giving cash to refugees either. Actually, I think that might be beneficial. And of course, if you have like an influx of refugees coming to a area, what happens with refugees coming? A lot of times people resent refugees, right? But what if they have money and they're spending that money locally, right? I mean, that might be better, right? I mean, people might like that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it makes a lot more sense to give money to refugees, give money to anybody who's in need of money. I mean, I just think that money in the hands of of people, even if sometimes they're not going to make the best decisions, is far better than just letting NGOs decide everything.
By the way, we're not talking about we're not socialist here. We're not saying UBI, the government just hands out checks. No, we're strictly talking about, peer to peer, giving people money from, Zakat distribution. So just want to make that disclaimer.
Right. You think UBI is socialist? That's interesting. But anyway,
universal basic income.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, money. The government's taking my money and giving it to someone else.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Undertones, socialist undertones.
Socialist undertones. Yeah, we don't have to.
Anyway, I won't get into it. But so I used to volunteer for Engineers Without Borders, and it's interesting to talk about this. So yeah, if it's an NGO is a lot more effective if instead of them building whatever we used to do like water filters.
Right.
But when we'd go to a community, we did not fund it. We said you guys have to fund it. So there's to be buying from the community. So now, how are they funding it? So they're gonna do their own fundraiser and build and whatever else. Okay.
Wait, the community has to fund
yes.
it? Okay.
Okay, now you have the money for it. Now where are we gonna get the materials? Well, if we cannot build it with what's in your village or like a village away, we're not gonna build it. So now you guys have to produce the goods, which means buying from your local pipe guy and your local sand person and your local water person, whatever else. Okay, now you have. How do you guys build it? You're going to be trained to do it, and you're going to pay a guy to maintain this. Okay, so now you have a new job in the community that learns how to build it, and everyone's going to help build it, and then you're going to learn how to maintain it, and then now you have you've created something sustainable essentially. So a lot of people want to donate a well. If you look at the statistics, most of these wells dry up in within a 5-year period or something like that. They're all empty and they're useless because they break and nobody knows how to fix them because you built it.
They're not being maintained.
They're not being maintained because you didn't teach anyone how to maintain it. You built it with your own advanced materials from the actual city, and then you drove it 10 miles into the village. So how are they ever going to get new materials for this? So that now when it breaks, you're like, okay, well, they push down on the lever, says no water, must not be good anymore. Bye. There could be a bunch of water down there, but they never trained anyone how to actually maintain it. Yeah.
That's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
We were talking about this outside. I don't know if you were in on the conversation about one of these nonprofit sometimes employees just reach out to me and they had some qualms about stuff that was happening at that organization. But one of the things that she had mentioned to me was that there was a donor who was just upset. He was somebody who paid for wells. There's one of these vanity sort of charity things where you go to a
get
family,
your name on it.
Get your name on a well, and they wanted a name on their well, and they got a name on the well, but and they got a picture that here's a well with your name on it. Yeah. And then he had a friend who did the same thing, but turns out it was actually the same well. The name was swapped, and he actually confronted them with it, and he's like, you guys just you didn't make a well, you just put my name on it. I mean, come on, it's so obvious. And this woman was like, oh brother, we wouldn't do something like that. And then she hung up, and oh my God, we totally did that.
Dang.
And and as I was talking to some other people in the charitable sector, and that unfortunately stuff like that does happen. This is a symptom, I think, of there not being a whole heck of a lot of accountability. And we thinking that what's good and what's charitable is what looks pretty on Instagram, I suppose, and that's about it. So yeah, hopefully will be more accountability. Anyway, I really appreciated this opportunity to speak to you guys today.
Alhamdulillah, I think it's a great time to wrap it up.
We never defined Zakat. Do you want to define it real fast?
Yeah, let's define Zakat
at the beginning if you want to. I don't mind, but then we'll end it. Inshallah.
Yeah, let's just on the closing note, we will do what we should have done 2 hours ago. Munir, just give us a quick rough
so
definition.
Very, very quickly. So typically in fiqh, they'll define something linguistically, technically, and then we can talk about objectives.
Sure.
Linguistically, zakat comes from to purify, growth, increase. So when you're giving zakat, yes, you're purifying your wealth because it's not your wealth in the first place. It is their right. It is the poor person's or whatever, fi sabilillah's money. It's not yours.
Yeah.
Technically, so this is the Hanafi IOK definition. I shouldn't say IOK definition. What I learned from IOK is the Hanafi. The transfer of ownership of a portion of wealth, so 2.5%.
But remember, you're not speaking for IOK.
I'm not speaking for IOK.
Right.
I'm just happen to be a student there or in the faculty there. A portion of wealth to a needy Muslim, not a Hashemite or a freed slave of that lineage, so family of the Prophet ﷺ, without benefit returning to the giver. So this is within that definition. And then in terms of objectives, so obviously it's a welfare system for the Muslims. You want to create harmony between the rich and the poor. It's actually an incentive to invest because in a Muslim world where riba and interest is, usury is haram. Now, if I just keep a bunch of money in my bank account, it literally doesn't go up. It doesn't go that 1%, 2% that rich people do here. It's just zero. And then if you wait a whole year, you lose 2.5% of it. So it's like, oh, what should I do with this money? If it just sits there, I lose. I should invest it. So that's another incentive there. So then you have also like, it helps like the crime rates and whatever else. So if a poor person knows I'm going to get money that's going to help me to get my basic needs, I don't need to go stealing because I'll get it for free from the government, right? So anyway, and there have been times in Islamic history where they had no one to give zakat to, just like to give a perspective, right? And then, which actually comes to the argument, right, is that there has been a time in history where we ran out of poor people to give, and they're like, well, what should we do with it? And no one's like, well, dawah efforts. Have we thought about all the dawah we could be doing to all the neighboring countries? That was not what they came up with. But anyway, there are
jihad efforts, you mean, not dawah efforts.
Well, anyway, there are 8 categories, and sort of the Tawbah, I think it believes ayah 60, who can go to. Number 1, al-fuqara, the poor people. So these are people who have some wealth, but not enough to hit the nisab, which is a minimum amount of wealth you need to have for zakat to be eligible for yourself. I think now gold, it's like 5.5K or like almost $6,000. So if you have $6,000 in your bank account, savings, checking, I'm going to be more conservative. Your stock, your 401k.
Your assets.
Anything cashable assets.
Yeah.
Take that number. If it's $6,000 or more, you owe zakat. And then there's masakin, the destitute. So these guys have nothing. They have like literally nothing. The refugees be like the closest thing we have to that.
Yeah.
And amilina alayha, the zakat collectors. But this is typically an official government organization. That used to be, at least. We don't have a khilaf anymore. So a lot of non-NGOs today are like, the
khilaf is IRS.
Yeah. So that's why, for some, that's why some nonprofits today, they'll say, oh, we only take 12.5% towards zakat. Where's that 12.5% coming from? 1 out of 8 is 12.5%. So that's what they're saying. We're the zakat distributor. So we only take this much to pay our admin in order to distribute your zakat.
It's a very nice one-liner.
But your newsletter would say otherwise. The other one, مؤلف قلوبهم, the ones whose hearts are to be reconciled. So the Prophet ﷺ would give them zakat. So leaders would convert. Because you have to remember, if you convert the leader of the tribe, the entire tribe converts, right? Yeah. This is how it used to be. He also used to give it to someone to keep enemies at bay. Like, hey, we're going to give you some more zakat. Or they wouldn't say, maybe he doesn't even tell them it's zakat. We're going to give you some money. Like, don't fight our people. Don't raid us, essentially. He used to strengthen converts. So I just came to Islam, but my family cut me off. Okay, you're a great recipient of zakat here. Hanbalis and Malikis, according to Hatim al-Hajj, would say it's applicable to non-Muslims as well. And that's why some people say you can give it to like a politician to lobby on your behalf.
Yeah, I think that might be the Maliki minority opinion. I just want to put that out there. The mashhur, I don't think. I don't think so.
So anyway,
I'm not an authority, but
it's typically said that by scholarly consensus, this category no longer is applicable since the time of Abu Bakr. Like they cut this off. And I think there's a story with like Umar, the second caliph. They came up to him, and they're like. They said, "Oh, where's our zakat?" He's like, "Get out of here! I'll kill you! Like otherwise, right?" And they're like, "What? What are you talking about?" They went to Abu Bakr, like, "Hey, like, what happened to that zakat you used to give us?" He's like, "What do you mean? Oh, Umar said we can't get it anymore." And he's like, "Oh, we're threatening to kill us." He's like, "Oh, if you said it, well then that's it." And then you have number 5, firriqab, so freeing slaves. There are some orgs that claim they're freeing slaves, and like yes, there is modern day slavery, but I think that's a lot tougher for us here in the West. So maybe like moving beyond that.
What if you have a mortgage? That's good.
Yeah, slavery to the state. Yeah, I'm a slave. I'm a slave to corporate America. Am I allowed to receive zakat? And gharimin, a person whose debt takes him below the nisab. So he actually has money. So maybe my account says 6,000, but I owe my friend 10,000. So really, I don't have access to that full 6,000 right now. Like I need to be paying him monthly and whatever else. So don't like people like, oh, my house is $1,000 zakat, so I can't ever pay zakat. No, that's not how it works.
No.
That debt is you're paying. Take your monthly payment if you'd like and subtract it from your bank account. That's okay, but not the whole entire worth because that's not what's due on you today.
Yeah.
Then number 7, fi sabilillah, which is its own discussion. But historically, it has always been fighting, physical fighting. The Prophet ﷺ opened it up to even Hajj. There's a hadith like a woman had a camel, or her husband had a camel. He dedicated it for sabilillah. It was supposed to go to war, but the husband died. And then the Prophet ﷺ came back into her and was like, "Oh, why don't you come do Hajj with us?" She said, "Well, I would have, but my husband dedicated the camel to fighting, not for Hajj, so we didn't want to use it like that." He's like, "No, Hajj is fi sabilillah for you." So that's where you get these different opinions coming out of. Then others would say, "Well, he only opened it up to that, not everything." So that's where you get difference of opinion. And then the final one, Ibn Sabi, so some guy who's traveling. He has money, but he doesn't have access to his account right now because he's stuck in your country and he cannot get access to his bank account. So he just needs money to travel back to where he is, and he'll be good now. So you're paying a plane ticket essentially.
Got it.
Okay, so that's the 8
Okay.
categories.
Well, did you have any final closing statements for us, Ahmed, or are we good?
I think I'm
Did
good.
I exhaust
Yeah.
everything out of you?
It's wonderful. It's wonderful to talk to you. It's a blessed day, and I
Alhamdulillah.
know we've all been fasting and talking. So,
Okay.
hopefully this was valuable to your listeners and made it a
Inshallah,
better.
yes.
I was able to contribute in some small way. Inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Okay, then. With that,
Okay.
this is Amal Mabruk with the Prophetic Mentality Podcast signing off. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Assalam.